I live a quiet life in a small town, mostly moving between my office and my home. The silence was broken by a sudden phone call from a friend I hadn't heard from in a long time. She sounded desperate and asked for a ride from the local supermarket because she had too many groceries for the train. When I arrived, the retail park was nearly empty, the bright signs of the shops flickering against the black sky. As we loaded the car, a group of men emerged from a nearby game center, their laughter echoing hollowly in the quiet lot. My friend went pale and whispered that she wasn't feeling well, urging me to leave immediately. As I pulled out, I noticed a pair of headlights in the rearview mirror following our every turn. "Don't look back," she snapped, her voice trembling as the car behind us began to accelerate. She revealed that the driver was her ex-boyfriend, a man she was terrified would try to force his way into the car. To avoid traffic lights that would force us to stop and unlock the doors, I veered off onto the narrow back roads. The roads became tighter, the trees closing in like walls of shadow as the chase intensified. Every time I sped up, the larger car behind us matched my pace, pushing me faster into the darkness. I asked why he was doing this, but she could only sob, saying she had made him angry and was running for her life. Remembering my car was smaller and lighter, I aimed for a road so narrow his larger vehicle might fear the damage. After a series of frantic turns, the headlights behind us finally faded into the distance. My friend explained that she had bought camping gear to live off the grid, desperate to escape her stalker and his group of friends. I drove her to the train station as dawn began to break, knowing she was going to Hotel Hop to stay hidden. She handed me 10,000 yen as a thank you and told me to forget her, for my own safety. Driving home, my heart nearly stopped when I saw the same black car idling in the lane next to mine at a light. 3 months later, I received a call from her number, but it was a cold, computerized voice asking if I had heard from her. I lied and said I hadn't, realizing they were still hunting her even through me. I never contacted her again, praying that she found the new life she was so desperately seeking. This story reminds us that sometimes being a good friend means knowing when to stay away. The unknown driver in the black car remains a ghost in my memories. Because in the small towns of Japan, the darkness has a way of following you home. Let us move on to the next account, deep in the mountains of Gifu. I used to camp every weekend to suppress my loneliness by exploring the wilderness. I set up my tent between two mountains, enjoying the quiet fall breeze by my campfire. Around midnight, I heard the unmistakable sound of my tent's zipper being pulled open. An old man leaned his head in and simply asked if I was traveling through the area. I shook my head no, and he just zipped the flap back up and vanished into the dark. Sleep was now impossible, as the absurdity of the situation kept my mind racing. Soon the zipper moved again, and a second younger man asked the same eerie question. I decided to pack my things as fast as possible, terrified of what game they were playing. Stepping outside, I was met with total darkness. They had no flashlights, yet they moved with perfect confidence. I saw their silhouettes again, but this time they were wearing dark robes with masks perched on their heads. I lied and said I had an urgent call to leave, but they noted they never heard a phone ring. I bolted, hearing the sound of branches snapping and a chilling choir of voices beginning to murmur in the distance. I reached the train station covered in cuts, a wreck of a man waiting for the first train back to civilization. I often wonder if the way I answered those questions was the only reason I was allowed to leave. After the terror of that highway chase, I sought peace in the quiet mountains of Gifu. I have always preferred solo camping because it allows me to truly disconnect from the world. The air was crisp and smelled of damp earth and pine needles. I spent the next hour setting up my tent near a small, bubbling creek. By the time the sun fully set, my small campsite felt like a safe haven. I started a small fire to boil some water for my dinner. The only sound was the crackling of the wood and the distant owl's hoot. I felt a sense of relief that the modern world was miles away. Around midnight, I heard a sound that didn't belong in the woods. It was a rhythmic thumping, like a drum being struck far away. I checked my watch, wondering who else could be out here at this hour. The sound seemed to be coming from higher up the mountain ridge. Then I saw a faint flicker of light through the thick foliage. My curiosity got the better of me, and I grabbed my small flashlight. I didn't turn it on yet, not wanting to give away my position. I began to hike toward the light, moving as quietly as possible. As I climbed, the sound of chanting began to mingle with the drum beat. The voices were low and guttural, chanting words I couldn't understand. I reached a large rock formation and peered over the edge. Below me, a dozen figures were gathered around a massive bonfire. They were all wearing pristine white robes that stood out against the darkness. Every single person wore a wooden mask with a frozen, haunting expression. One figure in the center held a long, curved blade above his head. The chanting reached a fever pitch, vibrating in my very chest. I watched as they brought forward a small, tied-up bundle. I realized I shouldn't be here and needed to leave immediately. As I turned, my foot slipped on a patch of loose gravel. The sound of the falling stones echoed loudly in the silent hollow. The chanting stopped instantly, plunging the forest into a terrifying silence. I scrambled to my feet and ran blindly back toward my camp. I could hear the sound of many feet moving through the brush behind me. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I reached my campsite, but it no longer felt like a place of safety. I didn't even stop to pack my things, I just grabbed my car keys. A white-robed figure stepped out from behind a tree just yards away. He didn't move or speak, just stood there with that horrific wooden grin. I pivoted and ran in the opposite direction toward the cliffside path. My legs felt like lead as I pushed through the thorns and brambles. I finally saw the headlights of my car in the distance, a beacon of hope. But as I got closer, I realized the driver's side door was standing wide open. I slowed down, realizing that someone was already inside my vehicle. The figure in the driver's seat slowly turned its head to look at me. It wasn't the mask that terrified me, but the wet, rhythmic sound coming from the back seat. The wet sound in the back seat stopped as suddenly as it had begun. I realized the mountain ritual had followed me all the way back into the city limits. I threw the car door open and sprinted toward the nearest 24-hour convenience store. Inside the store, the bright white lights felt like a shield against the darkness outside. A man stood by the magazine rack, his face obscured by a low-brimmed hat. He wasn't reading the pages, but watching me through the reflection in the window glass. I noticed the glint of a metal blade tucked into the waistband of his trousers. I retreated to the back of the store, hoping the clerk would notice my distress. The clerk was busy staring at a monitor, completely oblivious to the predator in aisle 4. I slipped out the side exit and ducked into a nearby 24-hour laundromat to hide. The hum of the rotating dryers was the only sound in the cramped space. Suddenly, a heavy hand slammed against the glass of the front door. The man with the knife stood there, smiling with a terrifying, empty expression. He began to pull on the handle, finding the door locked for the night cycle. I scrambled into the narrow gap behind the oversized industrial dryers. I pulled my knees to my chest and prayed he wouldn't break the glass. A loud crash echoed through the room as the front window finally gave way. The crunch of boots on broken glass signaled his slow entry into my sanctuary. He began to hum a distorted melody that chilled me to the bone. I could see his shadow growing longer on the wall opposite my hiding spot. My phone vibrated in my pocket with a notification from the local police alert system. I realized I had to make a move before he reached the end of the aisle. I grabbed a heavy metal fire extinguisher from the wall bracket beside me. Just as his hand reached around the corner, I pulled the safety pin. A blast of white chemical powder erupted into the man's face. He stumbled back, coughing and swinging his knife blindly through the white fog. I leaped over the counter and bolted through the shattered front window. The sound of distant sirens began to wail, cutting through the silence of the night. Two patrol cars screeched to a halt right in front of the laundromat. Officers stormed the building with their flashlights cutting through the chemical haze. They pinned the man to the ground just as he was trying to climb out the back way. I sat on the curb, wrapped in a shock blanket provided by a female officer. The detective informed me that this man was linked to the highway stalker case from weeks ago. It turned out the mountain ritual wasn't a separate event, but a meeting of his twisted network. For the first time in months, the weight of being watched finally lifted from my shoulders. Justice was slow, but every member of that shadow group was eventually identified and detained. My friend from the highway chase called me to say she finally felt safe in her own home. Japan's neon streets no longer felt like a maze of predators, but a place I could belong again. I walked toward the train station as the city began its morning routine. The shadows had been retreated, and the long night was finally over.